The night I turned 16, there were balloons, pale lavender and soft gold, strung up in the living room. The cake was chocolate ganache, my favorite, or at least it used to be. I sat on the far end of the couch, knees tucked beneath me, and watched as my sister twirled in the middle of the room, showing off the new dress my parents had just gifted her. It was my birthday, but you wouldn't have known unless you checked the date. "Do you like the dress, honey?" my mother asked, her voice soft and syrupy, the kind she only ever used with her. "Turn around, let us see." My sister beamed. She was 2 years younger, prettier in the way that people notice immediately, honey. Blonde hair, sharp little features like she'd been drawn with care. I never envied her beauty. That wasn't the problem. What I envied was their joy. They smiled at her like they'd been waiting for her to smile back. Like every flicker of her happiness was a paycheck for their parenting. They didn't look at me like that. "I thought it was my birthday," I said quietly, not expecting anyone to hear me, but my father did. He was reaching for another slice of cake, the piece they'd cut for my sister with the extra rows of icing, and he paused only long enough to toss the words over his shoulder. "Just lie there, your sister deserves fun tonight." I don't know if he meant it to land like a slap. Maybe he thought he was being funny, or maybe he believed, deep down, that I didn't need celebration anymore, that I could take a backseat while they clapped for her. I felt the weight of that sentence in my bones. Just lie there like a thing, like furniture. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time it felt final. My life, in hindsight, was a string of small sacrifices always made in her name. When I was 12 and needed braces, they said the budget was tight, but 6 months later, she got piano lessons and a new keyboard. When I asked if I could go to summer camp with my friends, my mother frowned, said, "You'll understand when you're older," and sent my sister on a theater trip to New York instead. They always had a reason, a good one too, something practical, something hard to argue with. But the outcome was always the same. Her joy came first. Mine could wait, or more often be ignored. At school, I was invisible, quiet, good grades, neat handwriting, no drama. I blended in because that's what I was taught. Don't make noise, don't compete, don't expect too much. My sister, she was the opposite, loud, radiant. She didn't try to outshine me. She just always knew the light was already on her. There was a day in winter when I got sick, really sick. Fever so high I couldn't move. My mother called the doctor from the other room while helping my sister get ready for a school dance. When I threw up in my sheets, I called for her. She walked in, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Why didn't you aim for the bucket? It's not that hard." I lay there, head swimming, throat burning, and watched her fuss over my sister's hair while I curled into myself and shivered. "Just lie there," the phrase echoed. That night, as I tried to sleep, I imagined myself as a ghost. Not a vengeful one, just the kind that hovered and watched the living forget they were being watched. I wasn't angry at my sister, not exactly. It's hard to be angry at someone who doesn't even realize they're stealing air from your lungs. She didn't ask for all the attention. She just accepted it like someone who doesn't know hunger accepts food without guilt. But my parents, they chose this. They crafted a version of our family where one child bloomed under spotlights and the other withered in the dark corners of the room. And for a long time, I told myself that maybe I just wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't lovable in the way they needed. Maybe they needed smiles and sparkle and drama to feel like parents, and I was just too quiet. That's how the betrayal seeps in, not in loud explosions, but in the slow, deliberate redirection of love away from you. The night of my 16th birthday, I stayed up after everyone had gone to bed. I sat on the kitchen floor, still wearing the same outfit I had on during the party, and stared at the untouched gift they gave me, a journal. Blank pages, still in its plastic wrapping. The symbolism was suffocating. Here, write your feelings, but don't speak them. Here, make your own story. But don't ask to be part of ours. I peeled off the wrapping, opened to the first page, and wrote one sentence. They told me to lie still so she could have fun. One day, they'll remember they had 2 daughters. I didn't know it then, but that sentence was the beginning of the end. The first stitch in the long, careful embroidery of payback Not the petty kind, not the cruel kind, but the kind where justice grows slowly, like vines cracking the foundation of a house built on unfairness. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to remember. And one day they were going to see me, truly see me, and realize too late what they'd done. When you live in a house where choices are never evenly split, you learn to count the invisible things, the times someone's eye moves to one side of the table, the extra laugh saved for a particular voice, the small checkboxes in daily life that add up to a verdict. I began keeping a different kind of ledger, one that recorded slights and transfers instead of calories and chores. It was private at first, an exercise to convince myself the imbalance was not imagined. The ledger started with trivialities. The date of my school photo and who got the framed copy on the mantel. The year my science fair prize money evaporated into saving for her future. A $2 bus fare my mother said she couldn't spare placed next to a plane ticket for my sister's spring break. Each entry was a tiny pin on a map that led to a single conclusion. There was an architecture to their favoritism, and it could be mapped. Mapping felt like reclaiming. When the world says you're nothing more than quiet, it's easy to accept it as a character trait instead of the symptom of being ignored. The ledger gave me facts I could hold up to the light. Facts were harder to argue with than feelings. So I taught myself to make things unarguable. At night, after classes and the shift at the cafe, I sat in my lamp-lit room with a laptop on my knees and a breakfast of stale bread and strong coffee. I enrolled in an online accounting class that cost less than a month of their attention, but taught me enough to read a bank statement like a map. I learned to spot transfers that looked like habit, the same week every month, the same round number, and I learned to trace how privileges move through a household like a current. It felt clandestine and righteous at once. Work was a lesson in patience. I tutored geometry and proofread resumes for undergrads. I took temp work, sending invoices, and quietly, like an invisible apprentice, I learned how small deposits became habits. I signed up for a community legal clinic where retired lawyers taught volunteers how to collect evidence, how to demand records without sounding like an attacker. I saved receipts like talismans, a receipt for a new violin for my sister, a receipt for my own medication that vanished into file boxes under the pretext of "we'll cover it later." Each piece folded into a case I hadn't been brave enough to file. There were practicalities to manage: rental agreements, credit checks, small talk with colleagues who thought my long hours were ambition and nothing more. I learned to make myself scarce at family functions, not because I favored absence, but because presence without power felt like participation in my own erasure. When people asked why I wasn't around, I said work or classes, and they nodded. It was the kind of silence that protected me and made my plan quieter. My plan, at first, was all edges. I wanted the numbers returned and an apology stitched into the family record. I wanted to make them pay not with cruelty, but with accountability. I imagined confrontation like a courtroom lights, calculated questions, their faces revealing the helplessness that hypocrisy layers over a soul. It felt satisfying to plan in such clean terms. Justice in those fantasies was an arithmetic, what they took plus interest plus recognition. But plans change as you learn more about the people you intend to punish. That change began with my sister's voicemail. I was at a coffee shop, arguing with a barista over a cappuccino, when my phone buzzed. It was a voice message from her, after a fight at school, something small, something theatrical. She apologized in a way that made the apology sound like surprise. She didn't understand why people were upset. She didn't grasp that she was the center of so much consternation. The message was short, hesitant. She asked if I could call. I almost deleted it, then I listened. She sounded younger than her years. She asked if I remembered the summer when we built forts in the backyard, and how I always let her pick the blanket. She said she felt guilty sometimes, that being chosen so easily made her feel like she had done something wrong she hadn't earned. She asked, "Do you think they love me more because I make it easy for them?" That question lodged in my chest. It rearranged the architecture of blame I had been building. My sister hadn't been the architect. She was the child who learned the family's language of approval and spoke it fluently. She had learned how to be preferred because it was simpler to be so. She had been as much a product of their favoritism as I had been its waste. I started looking for the spaces in which my sister's choices were formed. I watched how she moved through the house, how she hesitated at certain doors, how she collected trophies that glinted more like armor than like prizes. She sought validation not as victory but as breath. In conversations with friends and old neighbors, patterns emerged. My parents had poured resources into what they believed would reflect their success. A child who could be showcased at recitals and praised at community gatherings was, in their view, an investment. There's a cruelty in being raised as an investment. Investments are nurtured with targeted attention, groomed for spectacle. Children raised as investments learn to keep receipts of value, grades, trophies, appearances. They are applauded for being legible. I watched my sister perform the role she had been given and felt less like executing revenge and more like pulling the curtain on a play that had trapped us both. I adjusted my plan. The goal shifted from punishment to exposure and repair. I still wanted restitution because money had been siphoned from me in practical, measurable ways. But I also wanted to dismantle the script that told us our family's love had to be rationed. I wanted to show my sister she could choose differently, that attention need not be a zero, some game. The mechanics of exposure were as careful as the ledger. I began drafting letters to the accountant I'd found through the community clinic. I learned how to request statements without tipping my hand. I cataloged transactions, annotated dates, and built a timeline that read like a story of repeated preference. My plan had grown from rage to method, a slideshow of facts that would make hypocrisy audible in the way a recorded voice does. But method can be fragile. The more I planned, the more I worried about collateral damage. If I exposed my parents publicly, would my sister be crushed? Would the community's scorn fall on her small shoulders? I lay awake imagining her shrinking, and the thought of that stopped me in my tracks. I did not want to become the person who used truth as a blade without considering who it might cut, so I invited her in. One late afternoon I rode over to her apartment, carrying a takeout container and the thick manila folder that had become my private Bible. She opened the door with her hair in a messy bun, and the expression of someone surprised a guest had come bearing food. She hugged me in a way that felt like a plea and asked me softly if I was mad about the party last month. We sat on her threadbare couch, and I showed her the ledger. Her face shifted through an entire geography of emotions. Confusion at first, then a small, childlike disbelief, then the sharp intake that looks like breathing in glass. She touched the printouts as if they were fragile, then laughed, a brittle sound. I thought when they did things for me it was because they loved me. Sometimes love looks like spotlight, I said. Sometimes it's just fear, but it's also something you didn't earn or deserve or control. She asked questions like someone learning a new grammar. Why did they always say no to you? She asked. Was it because you were responsible or because they wanted me to have stories? The word responsible hung in the air like accused dust. It was our family epithet for me, the quiet one, the steady one, the one who would not make trouble. It was easier for them to give the showy things to the child, who made their pride visible, and the practical things to the child, who made their lives easier. We planned together then, awkward and conspiratorial like thieves who had forgotten to practice being ruthless. She cried not because she'd been favored, but because she hadn't known what to do with the favor. She admitted she disliked the way people's eyes tracked her like she held a prize. She wanted something different, she said, a life that was not curated for the approval of others. Her willingness surprised me. I had expected her to resist, to cling to comfort. Instead, she moved toward repair like someone stepping into light that had always been too bright and startling. We decided the revelation would be precise and factual. I would not hurl accusations that could not be documented. She agreed to stand by me, not as a co-conspirator, but as a witness to what she'd received and what she'd learned to accept. We rehearsed the night like a play without villain roles. Our script was straightforward. Show the facts, ask for restitution, ask for truth. No melodrama, no theatrics. If anything, The plan favored dryness, a deliberate, almost clinical exposure of how wealth and attention had been distributed. "I don't want to break them," she said one night, voice small. "I just want them to see. Then we'll make them look," I said. She nodded, clutching the edge of her pillow like a child learning to steady herself before jumping into a pool. The slow reckoning became a pact between us. I would bring the facts. She would bring the courage to say, publicly, what she had learned. It was imperfect. It was risky. But it felt truthful in a way the household had not been for years. When the day came to begin the delicate unspooling, my hands did not shake. That steadiness had been earned in late nights, in math problems, in watching the slow accumulation of receipts. The ledger had not only mapped their favoritism, it had changed me into someone who could see patterns, track them, and finally call them by name. I was still scared of what would be lost, scared of my parents' faces when their denial cracked, scared of the silence that follows the shattering of illusions. But the ledger had a line that kept me tethered. The truth, once held up, has a way of asking the world to answer. And if answers meant change, real, thorough, messy change, then I was ready to bear the cost. The night of the reckoning didn't look like justice. It looked like a family gathering. There was laughter in the air, the scent of lemon chicken and carefully bought wine, and the polished veneer of middle-class respectability. We held it in a rented hall neutral ground. The occasion, as we told them, was a celebration of milestones. My sister's new scholarship, my recent work promotion, a reason to gather, they said, a reason to brag, really. That's what my parents loved best, structured events, where they could present themselves as the architects of a perfect family. They came dressed for admiration. My mother wore her pearls. My father wore his navy blazer with gold buttons, the one he reserved for church and fundraisers. My sister looked radiant, but calm in a way she hadn't been in years. This time, she was prepared to speak her own truth, not perform it. I waited until dinner had been served, and the buzz of small talk gave way to clinking glasses. I stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, and walked to the projector screen set up at the front of the room. They didn't question it. They were too used to controlling the narrative to suspect anyone else might write it. The slideshow began simply. The first slide was a childhood photo, me and my sister, tangled up in blankets on the lawn, our faces sticky with popsicles. A caption read, "Once there were two." There were smiles in the room. My mother laughed softly. "Oh, I remember that day." I clicked again. The next slide was a timeline, a list of birthdays, mine and my sister's, with photos. On her years, elaborate cakes, hired ponies, DJ booths, themed parties. On mine, a single slice at the kitchen table. 1 year, no picture at all. A few heads tilted, then came the receipts. Plane tickets for her spring breaks, jewelry marked as gifts, my scholarship fund, drained for house emergencies. In the same month, she received a new car. I showed the bank transfers, the patterns, a spreadsheet overlay with highlighted cells, money that had been labeled as shared savings, but was only shared in theory. Evidence, piece by piece, like puzzle edges forming the shape of betrayal. My parents' expressions changed slowly. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something harder to read, not quite fear, but the choking recognition that the lie they'd nurtured might not hold up in public. The room was silent, then came the voicemail. I played it from my phone, holding it near the microphone. My father's voice echoed through the speakers, muffled, offhand, unthinking. "Just lie there, your sister deserves fun." A ripple of discomfort moved across the room like wind through dry grass. My mother's face went pale. My father opened his mouth, closed it again. I turned to them, not angry, not shouting. Measured, steady. "This isn't about one moment. It's about a system you created, a home where love was conditional and fairness was optional. I was told to be quiet, to be responsible, to be understanding while you gave her the freedom to dream." I turned toward the guests. "I'm not here to humiliate them. I'm here to show what it costs to be the forgotten one, and I'm here to ask publicly and clearly for it to stop." The room didn't erupt. It deflated. Some guests looked away, others stared. My parents looked like people who had fallen through ice, shocked, drenched in the cold of consequence. They tried to speak, but every sentence began with a denial or a minimization. It wasn't like that. You misunderstood. We were trying our best, but the evidence was there. The ledger was there, and perhaps most importantly, my sister was there. She stood beside me. And she said clearly, "You gave me everything and told her to wait. I didn't ask for it, but I took it because I didn't know how not to. That ends now." There was a silence I'll never forget. The sound of parents being seen by their children not as protectors or providers, but as people who could fail and had failed. Restitution came slowly and not without resistance. A lawyer helped formalize the process. Money siphoned from my education fund was returned. Property documents were adjusted to include my name. The financial side was neat if strained. The emotional side was messier. My father stopped calling for a while. My mother sent long emails filled with explanations that read more like confessions dressed up as defense. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought you were strong. We assumed you didn't need as much." Each message was its own wound. But they weren't lies, just weak truths, and I didn't need their guilt. I needed their change. I didn't stay in the house. I bought my own small place, modest, sunlit, mine. I painted the walls with my own hands, grew mint on the windowsill, filled it with books I loved and music I never had to turn down. It was the first space in my life that didn't require me to shrink. And my sister, she changed, not overnight. But truly, she stopped asking for praise, stopped performing for approval. She went back to school, this time for something she wanted, not what made our parents beam in public. She visited me often, quietly, sometimes just to sit. Once, on a quiet afternoon, she said, "You taught me what love actually is, not being chosen, but being seen. That was the gift." The revenge, sweet as it was, had never really been about money or shame. It was about truth. About tearing open the curated picture frame they'd built and saying, "This is what you didn't want to look at." About forcing them to understand that love isn't a resource to be rationed and earned, that parents do not get to pick their favorites and call it fairness. The final time I visited their house, the walls felt smaller, not because it had changed, but because I had. My mother tried to hug me and I let her gently, but I didn't lean in. My father asked if we were okay now, and I said truthfully we're closer to okay. They had paid. In money, yes, but more than that, in the knowledge that their legacy wasn't the one they thought they'd written. That the child they sidelined had risen, not to destroy them, but to reclaim herself, and I did. Epilogue, I kept the old ledger. Not because I needed the evidence anymore, but because it reminds me of the version of myself who refused to disappear. The version who quietly fought for fairness while no one clapped. Now, when I look at it, I don't feel angry. I feel powerful. I made them see me, and in doing so, I made me real, not the forgotten daughter, not the furniture in the quiet room, but the architect of my own light.